Infi, episode 17.
Welcome to Infi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Infi podcast. Today, I'm going to be speaking with friend of Infineo, Jonathan Kleiman, who is a lawyer with extensive experience in digital technologies. Let me first read from his official bio. Jonathan Kleiman is a prominent business lawyer in Toronto, recognized for his deep commitment to the legal aspects of business and cryptocurrency. His practice is centered on providing comprehensive legal services to businesses, especially in the evolving landscape of digital currencies and blockchain technology. Jonathan's expertise in business law is extensive, encompassing areas crucial for both startups and established companies. He excels in guiding businesses through the complexities of corporate structure, governance, and strategic legal planning. His official education is that Jonathan has a BA from McGill University with distinction and a JD from Queen's University. Beyond that, though, some of you may be familiar with him. He's very prominent on the intertubes, as they say, on the cutting edge of all these issues. Now, before we dive into the interview, and we do say this, or I say it in the discussion, but again, just to be clear on the front end, to avoid any possible misunderstanding, at Infineo, we are not into cryptocurrencies, all right? We're not issuing them. We're not dealing with them per se. What we are interested in is blockchain technology, right? We're taking real-world assets and putting them on the blockchain. So it's the same underlying technology that drives Bitcoin, for example. But again, here at Infineo, we're not directly involved with cryptocurrencies per se. Just want to make that clarification. All right, so as we'll see in this discussion, I'm going to ask Jonathan about his background and then have him discuss what he sees as trends in the future, regulation, adoption of these technologies by various types of businesses and so forth. So without further ado, here is my discussion with Jonathan Kleiman. Jonathan, welcome to the Infi podcast.
Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So I think, why don't we start, because as you and I got to know each other, so people will have already heard the official preamble that I give to these episodes. So they'll have a basic idea of who you are and why I'm talking to you. But to explain, when you first joined Infineo, you and I had a meet and greet kind of virtually. And one of the stories you communicated to me to kind of ingratiate yourself into my odd world is about your father and Ayn Rand. So can you tell that bit of your background?
Yeah, so I'm Canadian, but my parents are both American, and they're Republicans. So they're pretty, and they're very patriotic, or at least had been at the time. Not to say I won't accuse them of not being now, but they certainly really were at the time. So when I was little, and when I was 12 years old, my dad paid me two gold ounces to read Ayn Rand, read Atlas Shrugged. And I did, and I became obsessed between the ages of 12 and then going to university where I studied philosophy. She was sort of like why I studied philosophy. I then branched out when I realized that there were other people to listen to, as I was no longer a young teenager. But she sort of got me into philosophy, and whether it was her or just that basic free market philosophy, that all came from my parents. And of course, the rational nature of it.
Right. And do you still have those 2 gold ounces in case the Canadian dollar collapses?
I don't. So I think that if I remember, they were like,
did you trade them away for baseball cards or something?
Yeah, no, something like, I think they were like $350 when I got them each, but one had numismatic value. So I ended up trading them for money at some point when I was like in undergrad and needed money for whatever it is that people in undergrad need money for. But they were
that's
like
a lot of Taco Bell. So I'm going to say
it was. I don't think we even had to talk about. But yeah, no, it was more like a Burger King, McDonald's back and forth. But yeah, no, so I don't have those anymore. I have since had different gold ounces, but not those specific ones.
Okay, and joking aside, I think a lot of people, especially who either literally call themselves libertarian or at one point dabbled with it, and we've all had an Ayn Rand phase, and I'm no different in undergrad. So I will full disclosure, I never sat down and read her stuff cover to cover. My roommate and I got into her though at one point and like listened to Atlas Shrugged, or I think it was maybe both, maybe the Fountainhead too, on like audiobooks because we drove around a lot. So we did it that way. And then some of her other, nonfiction work too. And it's funny, like one of her things was to say A is A. And I was like, what the heck is this? But in this day and age, I can understand why she thought, no, it is very important to establish that A is A.
Yeah, it wasn't less important then. I mean, in a lot of the way that it's important now is very similar. I mean, she escaped communism, right? And a lot of the way that we're supposed to sort of say, yes, it's okay that A is not A, it's very similar to the sort of vibe in communism where it's like, these are the things we're saying now, these are the rules, and you follow them or you're out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's very important now, and it was then where she was coming from. And I think they're actually quite similar.
Yeah, that I guess in the Soviet system, like the party is all powerful, sort of like in 1984, that Big Brother and that regime defines what truth is, and there's no independent source of authority. So
yeah, it was clear that if you were to say something else, you weren't even allowed to say, like you weren't allowed to say something else. Right. Then it was the gulags. Now it was cancel culture. Right?
Mm-hmm. And their official posture was not merely, if you say something that goes against what we say, we'll punish you, even though that's in practice what everyone knew was going on. But their official posture was, what you are saying is incorrect because we define what truth is.
Yeah, they didn't even say because we define what truth is. That was implied, right? Just like now. Yeah. I mean, those are the similarities. So yeah, I think these are all very important lessons. And they're rearing their ugly heads.
And coming out of like Solzhenitsyn and stuff that I'm going to botch the exact, but something like to say, when you're in a regime like that, the most defiant thing you can do is to just tell the truth. Like that's the most revolutionary act to bring down that system. If you're in a totalitarian, mind control regime, is just go around saying true things, particularly, I guess, true things that everybody else knows is true, but that they wouldn't say. Like it's kind of refreshing.
It's almost like not even just true things, but other things. So like I've been saying that, or I think I don't want to botch it either, but I think Balaji said that X is glasnost, right? So that was the philosophy of open, the Soviet philosophy, or I guess post-Soviet, I'm going to screw this up, but of openness and not lying all the time. That's basically what X has become, right? This is like
and for people, you mean what the website formerly known as Twitter.
The website formerly known as...
Because we were doing Ayn Rand, A is A. So someone right now for X, you might think he meant it as a placeholder for insert anything you want into this statement.
X as not Twitter. X as in, so formerly known as Twitter is like a place where you couldn't before, now you can finally say things that are, you might say now that you can say things that are true, but more importantly, things that are false, right? And the litmus test, freedom and free speech is really, what do you tolerate that you disagree with, not what you agree with.
Yeah, fair enough. Good extension. Okay, so and I do want to get to Balaji in a bit to circle back to him because I knew you've turned me on to him recently, and what a very interesting perspective he has. So I do want to come back to that, but first let's get a little bit more of your origin story to become the superhero you are before us. So your official capacity with us is you're our in-house legal counsel, particularly on matters related to blockchain, that type of area of the law. Can you explain, like, at what point did you know you wanted to become a lawyer? Let's start with that.
Right. So I've been a business lawyer for about 13 years. So we'll start back where I left you off there in undergrad. So I did a 4-year program at McGill in Montreal. And what I didn't want to do is just go, I don't even know that they do hire out of that program. I don't know where you'd work. I think that if you wanted to do something, it would be academia, right? But I kind of wanted to stay in school. So I thought, hey, let's go to law school.
Can I just say, it's kind of funny though that you just said, like, no other outlet could possibly find a use for me, but academia might have taken me. That's
right. No, that's right. Well, that's what I was looking at. It's like, I always wanted to work. Like I was a serial entrepreneur. So I wanted to be in business, and I clearly wasn't cut out for management. Like I'm just not a numbers guy. And I saw that program and it wasn't for me. So law seemed to be a good way to me was a good way to sort of get good at something that's relevant to business that I can then apply to business. And I thought about the joint MBA program. I didn't end up doing that, but so I went to law school and then sort of articled for a year, worked at a firm, and then went on my own very quickly. And that allowed me to, one, start my own business, and two, I'm always working with people who have recently started their own business or are working on their own business and supporting them in that capacity. So I've enjoyed that sort of outlet for my entrepreneurial spirit.
Okay, great. And so you said you've been doing that for 13 years,
Yeah,
give or take?
one
Okay.
time.
Okay. And then at what point did you start like specializing in it, if that's the right word? And, correct me if that's not the way to put it, but how you now have expertise specifically in matters related to blockchain, cryptos, so forth.
Yeah, so that's really, it's a hobby, right? It became such a passion and a hobby, partially because of all the, the interest that I have in freedom and what that means, transactional freedom, and what that means for people who are unbanked, let alone us over here in the West. So I've always been interested in that. And as it's evolved, it's been something that I've paid a lot of attention to. I've spent a lot of my time sort of networking in that community. And then I'd say about 2018, the people that I was networking with needed help for businesses that were related to crypto. So I sort of applied that interest and merged the two naturally. It sort of just happened like, hey, yeah, I can advise on that. And a lot of it's very similar, right? It's contracts, it's in corporations, it's contracts, business sales and mergers and things like that in crypto businesses.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I should probably clarify just for the listeners before we get too deep into this that Jonathan and I might be talking about crypto a lot in this conversation. What we do here at Infinio, strictly speaking, is not crypto per se. It's just some of the applications that we're building take real world assets like life insurance and put them on the blockchain. Okay, so so the blockchain technology is related, and of course, regulatory and legal issues about that. But we're not here like creating new coins or something. I just want to clarify.
Right. So the important thing to think of it is what's exciting about blockchain is removing the middleman who's taking a fee and doing it badly, right? For example, I had to just pay out of trust for a client, and I sent a check, and it got there in 5 days, and the guy's like, this is going to cost me $400 in my bank to clear when we do a wire. And even that's going to be $50. That's going to take a week. So, it's very obvious that to cut out the middleman is very important. And that's forgetting about the fact that, most of the world is literally unbanked. They can't even have access to these institutions. So the reason I say this is a lot of what's exciting about what Infinio is doing, and a lot of people and organizations that are building on blockchain rails, is not just about, what's a cool currency that we can make money off of. It's like, what's without getting too deep into it, is how can we utilize blockchain to fix certain problems with respect to transparency and with respect to just doing things better and cutting out the middleman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just an example pertaining to me in my own life. So I have a business checking account and a personal checking account. And so, my clients and whatever, they pay me, to the business name that first drops into my business account. And then I have to write myself a check from my business to my personal name,
right, to
move money over to get into the account where I'm paying, electric bills and getting gas and whatever. And depending on the situation, there have been, so for one thing is you can't do it on a weekend. Like I have to, look at the calendar and realize, oh, wait a minute, I got to, because it takes a day for the funds to become available, and it won't do it over a weekend. So you got to be careful, if the personal account's getting low, I got to. And then one time I wrote myself a check and deposited it, and it was such a big number, I realized first world problems, that my personal checking account bank said, whoa, we're flagging this. And it took them 10 business days before the funds fully became available. Whereas if I had realized they were going to do that, I would have broken it up into two smaller checks to myself.
Yeah, it sounds like
how crazy it is. Yeah.
It's something that was developed when you needed that, right? And you don't need that anymore. And look, there's issues with blockchain, which is the reality of people have been taught to sort of just not have to worry, push the button, and if it goes wrong, someone's insured and they'll figure it out, right? So if people are going to actually be responsible for the mistakes they make, then they really need to sort of realize that when they're getting into it. I sincerely can't even return the phone calls I get anymore when people find me thinking that I can help because they got scammed in crypto, right? What's interesting to me about that is that more than half the time they're mad at the exchange, that the exchange had nothing to do with it, right? It's like they probably sent tokens from the exchange to a scammer and they're mad about it, but the exchange is not who scammed them. So, and the reason I'm saying this is that I just want to highlight. So the downside is people need to wake up and not trust that there's someone looking out for them to protect them and pay them out if they make a mistake, because there isn't, and you can make some horrible mistakes, and you need to educate yourself.
Okay,
but the
so
upside is immense.
Yeah, so you're getting at that. There's pros and cons to like the supreme or one advantage of cryptocurrencies. I know like Bitcoin maximalists say Bitcoin's Bitcoin, don't even call it cryptocurrency, but okay. The advantage to that is, especially if you're holding your own keys, that it's yours. Like nobody can take it from you. By the other hand, if you lose it, it's like, yeah, if you had a checking account and something, you got hacked or whatever, you could call the bank and, if they agreed with you, they'd give you your money back, or especially like a credit card's good about that.
Right.
If there's a fraud, somehow people get your number and they're buying stuff in a different city and it flags it as fraud. You say, yeah, that's not me. You're not on the hook for that. Whereas if you had your wealth in the form of gold coins and you lose them, there's nobody you call and say, hey, I need a replacement for my gold coins. So
the thing is, it's a lot harder to lose gold coins than it is to lose crypto, because there are people actively trying to take it from you using things that, like, you just can't click the wrong link. And it happens to some of the most sophisticated people. But operational security is important. And it's very easy to move things around so that your worst case is one wallet gets drained and not everything, right? So it's important to be educated. We live in a world where the SEC comes and says and blesses things, and then we're like, okay, we can invest in them safely because they blessed it. And then you have people getting rich off crypto, but the SEC didn't bless that. And then you have things like Enron, right? So you have, that's an old example. We have lots of corporate problems where things were blessed, like FTX, basically blessed by the SEC, shaking hands with all of, blue, and then horrible things happen. Billions of dollars are lost. So it's not just that you should be educated because this is crypto. You shouldn't be trusting these guys to bless things and then you don't have to make decisions or do your own research. You should be doing that in the first place.
Yeah. One quick anecdote, and then I want to respond to what you just said before I forget I won't say the person's name, but my co-author, Silas Barta, and we had this pamphlet called Understanding Bitcoin. People want to go look at it. So it's understandingbitcoin.us. You say, why didn't you put .com? Because that was already taken. That's why. So if you go look at that, and so this came out, I forget when, like probably more than a decade ago at this point. I'm getting mixed up with the timeline. But it was a fairly early thing where we were just trying to clarify like the economics of Bitcoin and just to let the different camps talk to each other. Because at the time, a lot of economists were saying things about Bitcoin that weren't right because the economists didn't understand like mining and what was actually going on. And likewise, a lot of the, computer jocks who were mining Bitcoin and stuff were just throwing out stuff like money's information, money's energy, and it wasn't quite, you couldn't plug it into the standard monetary, economic theory framework. And so that's this thing. So, and we just gave it away, and we had, of course, addresses at the bottom to say, hey, if you found this useful, send us a donation. I had a picture of Bill Murray and saying, hey, how about a little something for the effort? And so then we did early on, when we first launched it, we got a contribution from someone who, again, I'm not trying to be too coy here, but is a household name in the Bitcoin world. Like if I said the guy's name, everyone's like, oh, really him? Like that's cool that he likes your thing early on, and thought, yeah. And he clicked the wrong thing and he sent us, I forget which way it went. Bitcoin was over $1. So it was probably, he went to send us a certain amount of dollars in Bitcoin and sent that much in Bitcoin by mistake to us.
You sent it back?
Yeah. Like we verified, my co-author was handling it because he was the guy that had a mining rig and stuff. I was like the economist on the project. So he told me what happened, because then the guy emailed him and was like, oh my gosh, guys, I hit the wrong button. Can you, do me a solid here? But that's was the neat thing about it, was that technically he couldn't get it back from us. He gave it to us. We had it. And yeah, once we just made sure it wasn't some guy pretending to be him and scamming us somehow. Yeah, we sent him back, and just kept what he meant to send us. But that's what was so funny, is this was a sophisticated, player in the space, and just clicked the wrong button, and oops, he had to ask us, and technically there was nothing he could do.
Right. And then that went from $1 to $70,000. So that was probably a chunk of change at some point.
Yeah. And then, okay. So then you also, though, you went into talking about the trusting, and yeah, one of my favorite things is, so it's not about Bitcoin, it's about Ponzi schemes and just, regulatory safety and protecting consumers. But Bernie Madoff, running the biggest Ponzi scheme, some say, except for Social Security, in the private sector at least.
Or US dollar.
Yeah. There were, I forget the guy's name. I don't know if there was some private watchdog guy that had a newsletter advising on financial, and somebody tipped him off and said, you should look at this Bernie Madoff thing. These numbers don't make sense. And he looked into it and he concluded this has to be a Ponzi scheme. There's no way this is real.
I remember I watched the Netflix documentary or whatever it was on, so I probably do.
Yeah.
I saw this, but I don't remember his name.
And he was sending, if people, I'll put links in the show notes, folks, because I wrote this up at the time. So in my article, I got the guy's name. I just can't remember it. But he was writing letters to, I don't know, I guess the SEC or whoever, telling them, they wrote, they said, okay, yeah, thanks. And they didn't care. And it was partly because Bernie Madoff was on some ethics committee for financial integrity. You know what I mean?
It's Hanlon's razor, right?
Yeah.
It's you'd like to imagine that everyone's just trying to line their pockets because they're evil, but they're all just incompetent, right? And they're shaking hands with guys, and then they can't, everyone along the line's been saying this is on the up and up. You don't bother looking into it. There's a bunch of corruption in there, but it's not as rampant as it would look like from the outside because it was a lot of just people not doing their jobs, I think.
Okay, I'm not saying you're wrong. That wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making is, why in the world would you trust regulators? Because when it came to Madoff,
exactly. Well, that's
the
why
reason they didn't crack down on him is he kind of was part of the Madoff was in charge of making sure there was integrity and ethics in the financial sector.
Well, that's what you do, right? That's the move. So that's why people yelling about Bitcoin being used by criminals to launder money, JP Morgan, right? It's well, sorry, you guys think you have a monopoly on laundering money? Sorry, I mean, bleep that out if I'm going to get in trouble. But, there's been lots of scandals where they've been fined for moving money, for laundering money in general, whether it's not JP Morgan, big institutions. Fiat currency is very often used for criminal activities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's up until now, up until crypto, the monopoly has been in the hands of the corrupt big banks, big institutions.
Can you just elaborate a little bit? A few minutes ago, you were just talking about how you got into this area, and there's lots of businesses coming to you but just whatever metric you want to use, or even if it's anecdotal. But can you give a sense of, as of 2010, not many businesses had anything to do with Bitcoin, of course, and now where are we? Are there plenty of online merchants now who will take it as a form of payment and they just quickly offload it? Or, just can you give us a sense of just how big a deal is Bitcoin's penetration into the financial sector or the business world, let's say?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of really interesting businesses starting up around Bitcoin in particular. I wouldn't say that it's having much of an impact sort of in the world of adoption. I don't think that's what it's there for. It's sort of something to hold on to while everything else is in question.
Mm-hmm.
It's whatever you would want sound money for, right? But I don't necessarily think that there's a lot no one's using Lightning for any real amount. And the businesses that are coming up, when I say that there's a lot of them, they're in crypto. They're just sort of, whether it's gaming or it's wherever there's some need for an asset, a digital asset. That's where there's a lot of interest. So businesses are coming up around that. But where there's legacy companies, the big ones that are trying to get into crypto, I'm not seeing a lot of success in that part. If anything else, they're sort of investing in and buying up the companies with promise, but it's mostly new players, I think, that have promise in the crypto space.
Okay, so is this a good paraphrase of what you just said, that yes, there are more and more businesses that may start accumulating an inventory of crypto, perhaps primarily Bitcoin, but maybe other things too, just as a speculative move as far as an asset to have that might respond well in terms of conventional price inflation or something, just like they might buy, some gold coins or whatever.
That's definitely true. Mm-hmm. I mean, so you have to imagine right now that with the ETF coming, you're going to have a lot of commissioned salespeople now going around telling people, well, put 1%, 2% in this ETF. So that's going to change that. Mm-hmm. A lot of people would love to put their money into crypto, but don't understand it. And since the last peak, it's been sort of down only. But once you feel a bottom is in, it's the same with interest rates, right? It's not like you watch interest rates. Once they start coming down, you don't have to see them come all the way down. You just have to know they're coming down. And that changes market sentiment. In the same way that sort of seeing Bitcoin go back up in general, like, well, it can go back down, but we're still trending up. And we all know what that looks like going into a happening, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so I think it's clear from what you said, but you think things have turned around and we are now leaving the crypto winter phase and we're going back into a bull market?
I think we're out of the crypto winter phase. I mean, so like in early to mid 2023, it was like, are we done? Are we coming back? Are we ever going to come back? I think so. Maybe there's some blips. And now it's like, all right, guns blazing. I'm trying to fix this. And now it's like, everyone's back, guns blazing. VCs are wanting to put money in. They're accepting vesting terms. Projects that were like, I don't know when we're going to launch. We're digging our heels in, waiting for the right time. They're making launch dates. The people that I know that are involved in the space, including myself, are just doing video calls all day. Like, you almost would look at and say, hey, like to an influencer, for example, are we back? And they're like, I'm already getting burnt out. What do you mean? It's rolling.
Okay. Can you speak to, maybe some of the things that you see in the near term, like whether it's regulatory changes or business practices or, things that financial institutions are doing? I'm just saying, because like I know as I've gotten more into this stuff, just because of my role here at Infinio, like stuff that it wasn't on my radar, but just to see like household financial companies that have a separate division, a division that's building out like a blockchain application for part of what their investment bank is holding and things like that. So can you just speak in general about some innovations that maybe the general public is not aware of?
Yeah. So like there's some really cool, like what Infinio is doing, like anything that's putting things on the blockchain for an actual purpose, like, so, for provenance or to show ownership or things like that. Those are happening. They're very cool. A lot of companies are shoehorning crypto into something that doesn't make sense. Whether it's Starbucks giving NFTs out, like I think that's really cool, but it doesn't matter that much. I don't think it does what drives adoption. It doesn't change their business model. And on the dark side is sort of spinning off a token to raise money instead of by selling equity, right? And you see a lot of that, and that may be okay if you have a token that will, like, if you're selling a token that people should want to own for some reason, like maybe there's utility and they actually might want to use that thing. Or for example, like Ethereum, for example, there's no doubt that you would want to have some because you might want to use it. If you're someone who uses the Ethereum blockchain, it's the gas token that has utility. So things like that, where you can imagine actually owning them for a purpose. I don't mean those, but sometimes you make a token where it's like, well, we have a business doing XYZ. Like, let's say we have a casino, an online casino, and we're going to have a token. And then you raise, 20 million, 50 million, $100 million on that token with no promise of any, sharing of platform fees or things like that, where it gets a little dark. So people have to be very aware of what it means to be buying a token versus like owning a token from a successful business doesn't mean that success is flowing into your hands.
Okay, great. What about on the legal/regulatory side? Are there any things that either recent past or upcoming near future, either in Canada or the US, however you want to field the question, that people should be aware of in terms of, are the regulators catching up to this new world? Put it that way.
They are. I mean, I think I would have my eyes on the OSC. They're very active, and I think
what does that stand for?
Sorry, the Ontario Securities Commission. They're one of the more sort of well-known and active Ontario, Canada securities regulators. And whereas it used to be the whole world sort of, even in writing, would write like whatever the SEC did, that's what we think in terms of global regulators. The SEC is looking at the OSC. So you'll see a lot coming out of it. And you see sort of the SEC just fumbling, embarrassing itself, if you ask me, trying to use definitions that don't make sense and make arguments that don't carry water and then having it fail in court. So there's going to be a lot of change, I think, coming up. We're going into an election cycle. So I would expect to see a doubling down of whatever it is that whatever the Biden administration's been doing. And it's clear that they've been attacking crypto. It's not working. In fact, it's like we're leading into a bull market while they do that. They take credit for FTX. They literally were the ones taking his money and giving him hugs and everything. It was citizen journalists that took him down. In fact, if it wasn't for them, they would still be propping him up. So I would expect them to, now that they've been embarrassed by crypto, they will do whatever they can to take it down, which is quite limited. And on the same token, you're going to see them, they're going to have to do a reversal on rates because they really need a good economy going into that election. So if there's anything that's good for crypto, it's rates going down. I'm sorry, I've lost the thread. What was your question again?
Oh, I just, innovation, like things coming down the pike that the public, and so usually they start with the OSC.
Yeah, so I do. I think that so regulations are going to come, but it's going to be a slow battle in terms of what gets through in the courts and back and forth. The ETFs are coming, like the institutional money is coming. And I think that's what will drive the innovation in the space, because everything can be on the blockchain. Like we have blockchain technology. Let's call it like a secure ledger. It could be any guaranteed way to be secure in the information that you recorded that we all have a consensus on. And yet we don't use it for voting machines, right? So there's a ton of things that will sort of wave into the world to use blockchain technology that are not yet. And I think the institutional money coming in will speed that up. When you hear the CEO of BlackRock say Bitcoin going up is a flight to quality, we no longer have the question. It's like, is Bitcoin a real thing? It is. So then we get back to, is the US dollar a real thing?
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. So I've noticed if I'm hanging out on Twitter, or X as the cool kids call it now, if I bring up the idea of putting something on the blockchain that is not Bitcoin, there is a certain group of Twitter users who often have lasers coming out of their eyeballs, who will come in not so diplomatic a fashion, inform me that no, the only thing blockchain is useful for is to keep track of Satoshis and what addresses they're located at. And any other thing is just some guy, dropping a buzz term, and you could just do what you're trying to do with a centralized database like SQL or something. And no, the only thing blockchain is good for, will ever be good for, is Bitcoin. End of story. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, obviously I disagree. I think what we're doing at Infinio is incredible with blockchain. You can't do it without blockchain. You need a middleman. So I disagree with that. But I think there is something important to say, which is I think there is a big distinction, which is that it's probably unethical to advise people to buy anything but Bitcoin. And a caveat is, unless it was ethical to advise them to buy stocks because you're, licensed to give trading advice or whatever the case may be. But everything but Bitcoin is a security, I think. And more importantly, I don't mean like what the SEC calls a security. I mean, from an ethical perspective, it's the kind of thing where if you're going to tell someone they should buy it, you should make disclosures. By the way, I have some inside information about it, right? So with Bitcoin, there's no inside information, but maybe there is with Ethereum. Like they're going to do a hard fork. I talked to Vitalik. He's about to sell his, holdings or something like that. If I tell you to buy Apple stock, then I should tell you if I have some big interest in it or if I know something. But if I tell you to buy a house in Manhattan, then there's no way for that to be unethical, right? If I tell you to go invest in gold, there's no private secret information. There's no way that I'm just trying to pump my own bags, right? As they say. So to go on Twitter, when you do go on Twitter and you say, oh, I think you should buy this token, there may be an ethical problem with that. And you should be concerned about the fact that it's very zero sum. Whereas if you go on Twitter and say everyone should have a big chunk of their money in gold, I don't think that there's a problem with that. So there is an important distinction.
Okay, so fair enough. And when I realized the distinction you were making, like somebody who, like, I may have given advice years ago, it's like, hey, I think the economy is in bad shape. Everybody should get multiple streams of income and save more than you were planning to do. And that's a good. And there, it's not that, it's because I'm long the US dollar and I was trying to get people to accumulate dollar-denominated assets.
Right. If you were like short the pound and you were like, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Whereas, I could see how if I say, everybody, you should go really check out this Tesla stock, that's a qualitative.
That creates all other problems, right?
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
Yeah, maybe you don't know anything special about Tesla and you're just saying, I think, I noticed that more people are driving them. That's not necessarily unethical,
Okay.
but
And so then
there may be disclosures.
so to connect that back to the Bitcoin Max, is what you're saying is you understand why their knee-jerk reaction when someone's announcing some new non-Bitcoin
I've given
blockchain
some, yeah, I don't know. I
is
wouldn't
that
give them too much credit because I think you're right. I think they are like, this is my favorite thing and don't talk about anything else to some extent. And people are like that, right? People just don't like to be that open to other ideas. Maybe it's exhausting to be challenged on their idea all the time. I think it's more exciting to sort of be challenged and have to and to learn about new things. But I think that's the Bitcoin Maxi is they see it as sort of stealing the thunder of what cryptocurrency is for. And it can be frustrating, right? Because they see the value in Bitcoin and then all the hype goes into like, Shiba Inu. And that, then the world is not advanced any further. And it can be frustrating.
Right. And even just culturally and sociologically, with every like niche thing, there's this phenomenon of like gatekeeping and purity tests. Like I'm an Austro-libertarian in our little world, we've got that too. And, it's like the worst people in the world are the people that agree with us 99.5%. Because it's like, you want to know better. Yeah.
You just see, so I collect art on the blog, like I collect crypto art. And of course, AI is now a big part of it. So it's amazing if you would just see the debates on, is it art, if it's AI? And, it's almost like I want to go in there and be like, I want to see the photographers who don't use a darkroom because what the hell is this nonsense of digital photography, right? Where's your darkroom? It's all gatekeeping and it all changes. Things change, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting conversation.
Okay, well, let's
Tangent.
Look to the future now a bit. And I know you've been influenced and you turned me onto the Balaji, if I'm saying his name correctly. Can you explain who he is and then, why what some of his perspectives are that you really think, he's onto something and this is a good way of parsing what the heck's going on, while you see the news today?
Yeah, he's someone like a techno-libertarian. So he was I think a developer, but early in some big companies, Facebook, I think, and he's got a couple $100 million. And he's very active in sort of spreading the message. He wasn't always a Bitcoin maxi, but he is very good at seeing the writing on the wall and predicting what's going to happen. Like he was, as far as I know, the first to say what would happen as a reaction to COVID. Like when it was just a China thing, he was out there being like breathing the alarms. There's going to be shutdowns. The whole economy is going to be affected. All this stuff. People thought he was crazy. And then when we had SVB and the banks going down because they had made bets that the Fed had implied were good bets that ended up being not good bets that the Fed knew. And then they looked at these banks and said, well, you managed your money badly. He saw the writing on the wall there, and he basically said, okay, now it's time for Bitcoin because this is just nonsense. They're going to bail all these guys out. They have no choice, right? They're going to let a couple of these die because they're Silicon Valley, and it's for some reason Blue decided that Silicon Valley is against them, but they can't do it to all the banks, and they're going to flush out all the banks, move them all to JP Morgan. And he saw the writing on the wall, and he said, we call it the bit signal. He said, go buy Bitcoin because now's the time. Once this all comes to fruition, you won't be able to anymore. And he did what he made a bet. He said, I just forget what it was, like 30 days or 6 months, whatever, some ridiculous amount of months that Bitcoin would go to $1 million. He has since explained that he knew that he would lose that bet, but he wanted to be as loud as possible raising this bit signal. And, people I know have always been like, well, I can't buy Bitcoin. It's X price and now it's too high, right? But if you think of Bitcoin as 100 million, one Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis, then it makes sense to start accumulating some of them, especially if you understand that over time it's up and to the right, and over time they're destroying the dollar, which is interesting to me because, like I said, I grew up, my dad's a gold bug for all of these same reasons, but he thinks I'm delusional because it's not gold, it's Bitcoin, right? But he struggles to have even the same conversation with me, even though I'm like, can you come back to can we just forget about the thing we're talking about? And we both agree they're like, even in the 80s, he thought that they were destroying the dollar. So what he must think they are now, and he does, but it never ends at Bitcoin, right? So for me, I think, gold is very clunky. Like I can't transact with it. the internet is taking over. Like, to quote Balaji again, what did he say? The internet is as American as America is British, right? So America is on the internet, but so is the rest of the world. And these currencies, these tokens, these things that are going to, these technologies, these ways of doing things, these rails, they're a global phenomenon. And you're going to see more and more of it.
Yeah, you touched on two things here. And folks, again, we'll link to this, like, it was like a 4.5 hour podcast interview that this guy did that Jonathan had sent me to say, here's a good introduction.
7.5 one?
Yeah. And what's that?
There was a 7.5 one. I wasn't sure which one
I think you sent me the 4.5 one.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm only even 2 hours in, but it's just like, oh yeah. And so two of the things he said, and then when he's just riffing here with this host who's barely saying anything, but if the host made the right call, like, yeah, just let this guy go. Yeah. This is going to be amazing. I don't take that advice here at Infi. I usually have to speak. So it's one thing was to say that he views America as 3 tribes now. So it's been commonplace for a few years to talk about, the red tribe and the blue tribe, but then he said there's also this like tech bro tribe.
It's such a powerful thing.
Yeah. And just like, that is a better framework. Obviously, all these things are simplifications.
Because all these tech, all of Silicon Valley, if you wanted proof that Silicon Valley was blue, look at it, right? Like, they're handing out heroin needles on the streets to everyone. You can't walk, and there's poo-poo on the floor. Like, that's not red. That's not Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But blue at some point decided that they turned on Elon Musk. They turned on crypto. They turned on tech. They turned on SVB. They turned on the banks. They just turned on Silicon Valley. And it's not like those guys are all of a sudden gun-toting, free market. Like, these are not those people. They're not red. They're gray. They're just a different thing. All they want to do is build cool shit on the internet. Sorry to complete that out. And so there's a power to that, to be able to identify with something that makes a lot more sense. It's like, so if you were in Silicon Valley and you're like, oh yeah, actually I'm blue, I care about all the blue issues. And then they come down on you, you're not all of a sudden anti-abortion or whatever it is. I'm Canadian. We don't have the same lines, right? But whatever it is that you're supposed to believe, once you switch parties, that's not naturally what's going to happen once you get kicked out of blue, right? So yeah, I think there's this gray, which is basically people who just want to build cool stuff on the internet, and it's basically it. It's America, but it's India, and it's Bangladesh, and it's everywhere you can find human beings that can get on the internet. It's not necessarily, you don't need an ID, you don't need a passport, you don't need a bank account. You just need, and now with AI, you just need to punch in some commands of a cool idea, and you can have it programmed. Like, the world is flat, and it's really cool to be around for this time.
Yeah. And then another thing he said that, this one's not so, with a lot of his things, it's not that any one thing was particularly mind-blowing, but it was just more like he had just a string of like, oh yeah. And I also liked that he would make some statement and then back it up with like 8 examples, and like he was trying to convince the listener. He wasn't ramming it down.
He cares to spread his message.
Yeah. So the other big thing here as we wrap up, just I want your reaction and thoughts, if you have any extension, is he was saying that he was drawing comparison, the Soviet Union as it was waning, it rejected outright communism and basically was copying the United States model, but it was just literally the poor man's version of capitalism. And so of course
now we're doing that for China.
Yeah, that wasn't a tenable system. And so then he says, so right now the U.S. is actually copying a different regime. Which one? And then the host is like, China. He said, yep. And there were, with the social credit scores and all this stuff, and of course, and then the big one,
the best line
was the lockdowns. Yeah.
Oh yes, for sure, of course. But this line is, you can't out China.
Yeah. Right.
You can out America. You can use your values of freedom and have people who innovate. We've seen that, but you can't out China.
Mm-hmm. And so what he says, they're like, oh, okay, but then he just kept talking, and like as more and more illustrations of the principles. Like, oh yeah. For example, that red-blooded GOP right-wing conservative types who used to be all about free markets and free trade, well, that's all out the window, and now they're embracing industrial policy, partly because China's eating our lunch. We can't just sit here and let these like Tucker Carlson recently just blamed he was on Glenn Greenwald's show and blamed everything on libertarian economics. It was like, I don't remember people
missed that.
listening to me.
Very good.
Now this is all my fault. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, but on the flip side, the blue left-wing progressive, speak truth to power are all now about controlling speech when they used to be the biggest champions of free speech. And so both sides are throwing out, like you say, their defining attributes and converging on doing what China's been doing.
Yeah, I mean, like I told you, I have Republican parents. I mean, I fought with them about the Iraq War, and so I grew up with the belief that Crystal and Kagan and the red likes war, right? And now with the neocons and everything, now blue likes war. Blue's beating the war drum, and it makes just as much sense as the Iraq War. And so you just like the way he talks about how things become their opposites, right? And how the New York Times whitewashed the Soviet Ukrainian famine, and now the New York Times is backing the Ukrainians over Putin. I mean, I'll botch it all. It's the one I think I'm referencing the 7-hour podcast, so really worth listening to. But yeah, there's just you're right. He illustrates things very well with history, and he has some really cool, snappy catchphrases to help you remember it.
Yeah, and again, like you say, he can't out China, and the problem is that yes, as the U.S. is declining. And the West in general, but the U.S. in particular, like they're realizing there's a sense in which, oh yeah, the Chinese are rising and we're sinking. And so then the solution is not, okay, let's start adopting their methods. That no, you had your own model. When the U.S. was dominant, it was because it, imperfectly lived up to its ideals of free markets and rule of law and open expression, freedom of speech, the polar opposite of Chinese communism, Mao and whatever. And that now that it's, the U.S. has lost its mooring. It doesn't believe in its own principles anymore. And therefore, okay, so that's...
And China found its footing by copying America, right?
Right.
To the extent that they've kept some of their totalitarianism, but they brought capitalism and doing it well, like they're, building factories in a day. And, it takes... Again, listen to that podcast. It's really good.
Yeah, so the one that you sent me as well that we'll link to, folks. Yeah, there's a part in there, where he's talking about how there's footage of the Chinese building I think it was like a train station in 8 hours or something.
And you can't get the permits for that in 18 months.
Yeah,
right,
augmenting it with a news story about, I don't know if it was the U.S. or Canada, but where just to build a bus shelter, like the
bus shelter. Oh, that's such a good one.
Where people are waiting for a bus, and it was like going to cost $50,000, and you needed approval from 8 different agencies.
It cost them like hundreds of millions of dollars, and they couldn't put a thing to block the rain because they couldn't get the permit for the rain. The whole thing is just it all feels very late stage, looting of the coffers of an empire. I hope America can pick it up and figure it out, but it's not going to be by implementing Chinese policies.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, why don't we wrap up there? My guest has been Jonathan Kleiman. Jonathan, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, the Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit infi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.